Late summer, 1831, St. Cyprian Parish on the Mississippi. The baptism book lies open on a table that lists every hour in neat ink. At the bottom of one page, 2 infants are christened on the same afternoon, beneath the same roof, by the same priest. The entries are written in a steady clerical hand. One godmother's name appears twice. Where the mother's name should have closed a line, a corner is missing, torn away in a triangle that lifts light through the gap like water through a sieve. Nothing else on the page is damaged. Around that book, the parish keeps its other papers. Notarial acts bound under blue boards, plantation physician's notes in a sanded ledger lined with fevers and births, a steward's accounts with ration tallies, and, in a chest no larger than a child, a packet of letters knotted with ribbon and labeled in French. "To ne pas ouvrir." Do not open. The ribbon is brittle with age, but unbroken in the photograph, taken when the chest was logged into the parish storeroom. The next inventory notes the chest number and shelf. The one after that does not mention it at all. The official record is polite. 2 children baptized. Sponsors present. Latin formulas respected. A priest who knew his place and his language. Outside those lines, adjacent to them, the household papers show other habits. In the steward's book, the wet nurse receives double rations, milk for 2 house infants. The same week, a cash disbursement is entered to be the enslaved midwife who brought most children on the place into the world. No purpose is listed. In the physician's daybook, under a list of pulses and poultices, a line notes, both infants thriving. No mothers are named. Elsewhere in the same book, mothers are named. When they die. When they are treated for the yellow fevers. When a midwife is credited with saving a life. Here, for these 2 infants, the notations are clinical and sparse. The private page that says the most was never meant for us. It was the midwife's own tally, small and practical, pressed into service later as scrap to wrap a bottle of laudanum. On the back, faint and durable, 2 names appear, then a line through each, then the names again, seamed in a way that implies exchange rather than erasure. The handwriting is a practiced domestic hand. No flourish. If there was an explanation, it does not survive on the scrap. The doctrine the parish lived by wrote its law in Latin, but enforced it in English. Partus sequitur ventrum. The child follows the condition of the mother. Born of a woman enslaved. Enslaved. Born of a woman free. In a place where a signature on a bill of sale could turn a life, and a sacrament could not erase a ledger, blood and paper ran beside one another without ever touching. To exchange names between columns was not a matter of romance. It was a matter of fate. Countess A. Lottie de Villiers, her courtesy title old enough to impress and thin enough to be mocked, brought European polish to a parish that cared more for barrels than for bows. Prosper de Villiers, her husband, counted sugar hogsheads as other men counted sons. Between them stood B., the midwife, nominally owned by the household and practically the woman upon whom all birth depended. The priest signed his book. The notary stamped his petitions. The steward balanced rations against debts. The physician measured pulses. None of their orderly habits explains why one godmother had her name written twice on a page that should have needed only once. A month and a week after those baptisms, a petition appears in the notary's index for the manumission of an infant, M.H. Mixed. The petitioner is named not as a mother, but as the mistress of the house. The seal is E. Lodi's, wax impressed with a bit of family silver that had survived the crossing. On the face of the petition, a line is added in the notary's thin, economic hand withdrawn for the tranquility of the parish. The word tranquility bears a tone that belongs to sheriffs and newspapers. It belongs, in other years, to the Board of Health when cholera moves upriver. That week in 1831, the board did not meet. The city did not print panic. Tranquility refers not to disease but to politics. The steward's cash book shows a payment to B, the midwife, the same day the petition is withdrawn. No purpose is listed. The amount is large enough to be unusual and small enough to fit under the word customary. The double ration to the wet nurse continues another week, then returns to single measure. The physician's daybook records, both infants thriving. He does not say where or with whom. 2 infants became the town's rumor the way river water becomes air in summer. Slowly, invisibly, touching everyone without asking permission. The parish learned to say, 2 made 1, and meant by it what they could not print. They learned to say, the yellow summer, and meant by it both the fevers and the law's way of naming a person without acknowledgement. Mixed. The priest learned to stop talking about mothers in certain entries. The notary learned to sleep with one eye open. The countess learned to light 2 candles in a single window. So 2 women said in their kitchens many winters later. Whether she did or did not is not written in any ledger. It is written in the tone with which the town learned to speak of the house. In 1867, long after the violence had arrived and receded, and arrived again under new flags, a succession file opened with enough force to threaten the line's legitimacy. The depositions, copied in a clerk's round hand, use the phrase, the yellow summer, to place events within their own time. The petition is sealed, bound with red ribbon, and placed on a shelf. The parish index numbers it incorrectly, by 1 digit. A misnumber, that is, to any reader of archives, the surest sign that a file is meant to be found only by those who already know where it is. What began as a pair of baptisms becomes, in the record, a sequence of careful gestures, a torn corner, a double ration, a petition that announces itself and withdraws, a bloodless confession in a priest's unsigned letter about the exchange of burdens. No one says the word exchange in any document that holds a signature. It appears only in copies and in phrases that learn to say 2 things at once. By mutual assent, the confessor wrote, for the peace of the parish. The notary wrote, thriving. The physician wrote. The midwife wrote the names, crossed them, and wrote them again. If a pact existed, it did not belong to courts. Every archive has its own temperature. This one is hot with the absence of what ought to be straightforward. A second godmother's name, a mother's line. It is cold with the presence of respectability wax ribbon, Latin, seals. Between those temperatures, 2 infants begin a story that neither chose. Here they remain initials. Here we speak of them with a care that the room did not offer them at the time. The file with the ribbon, the 1867 succession, the 1831 petition, keeps its silence. The midwife's scrap, the steward's ration, the physician's note. These continue to speak past the seal. If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell us what city-state you're listening from. The years that hold this file were teaching the parish to look one way and to live another. Louisiana had passed from hand to hand until paper, not kings, gave orders. The French code that once instructed masters and priests, so meticulous about catechisms and Sabbath, had been blunted by American law that cared less for grace than for property. Yet one principle remained constant under every flag: partus sequitur ventrum. Status flows through the mother. The law pretended to be neutral. It was not. It fixed futures in a place where futures were traded. Sugar made nightmares into ledgers. The cane fields along the river demanded bodies, then punished them for being necessary. The houses along the Batcher measured themselves in things that survived storms: trunks, candlesticks, names. The people on either side of the door learned different calendars. On the house side, calls to dinner, baptismal days, social calls annotated in French. On the quarter side, carding days, harvest days, births tallied against rations, and the seasons when traders came upriver. In that division, women did most of the work of carrying life, and men did most of the work of counting it. Countess A. Lodi did not invent her title. Her father brought it with him, to impress a parish that was impressed more by taste than by a brace of ancestors. She carried it like a good dress, and it opened certain doors. The courtesy in front of her name did not open all doors, and certainly not the one we are asking about. It placed her in rooms where notaries waited and priests hesitated. It also placed her in the hands of people who measured honor by what they did not say. Prosper de Villiers inherited land and calculations. He married A. Lodi to make one list pay another. He was not more cruel than his peers. That is not a kindness. It is a context. The plantation physician kept a professional distance measured in grained paper and tidy columns. He recorded choleras and chills and the yellow fevers, and sent his bill every quarter. His notes about 1831 are full of weather, of restlessness among hands after rumors from Virginia, and of infants marked as house, born. He is not a sentimentalist. He writes what he can charge for, and he does not write down what he can only think about. B, the midwife, is not in the lists of family silver or horses. She is in the pages that come into being only when necessity calls her. When she is paid, she appears as B, midwife and nurse, one line without surname and without praise. Her value is described in absence. When the physician remarks upon her skill, he does so by omitting her. Infants thriving. He writes with the confidence of a man whose credit will be given to him regardless. B's handwriting appears on labels and on scraps, because those were the papers allowed to her. In her tally, 2 names are written, then crossed, then written again. That scrap sits like a pebble that, when touched, moves the whole room. The parish notary is disciplined. He writes everything, and he writes nothing. He receives petitions. He observes form. He does not add commentary. On the 16th of September 1831, he registers a petition to manumit an infant, initials M.H. The seal beside the petition is A. Lodi's. The words that nullify the petition are the notaries withdrawn for the tranquility of the parish. He writes the French, then the English, as if to ensure that all parties are bound by comprehension. The petition is removed from the docket. The index corrects the date and spells the name again. The copyist's hand is as calm as if nothing important has happened. Between 1831 and the later suit of 1867, the river carries more than sugar and sermons. Rumor from Virginia about violence. Nat Turner stalks the Gulf and the levees. Parish statutes stiffen. Manumission, which had never been generous, becomes harder. The police juries and courts are taught to be suspicious of generosity. Clergy are taught to preach obedience and to let charity be the private courage of women. In that hallway, a petition to free an infant carries the weight of a phrase the parish learned to say in its own way, not now. By the time Reconstruction arrives, in uniforms and in arguments, the parish has learned to read even more carefully than before. The 1867 succession that touches this file is framed as a matter of which pieces of paper are allowed to talk to one another. The court declines to make a pronouncement the town is not ready to hold. It binds the file and misnumbers it. The misnumber is not a detail. It is a decision. An alienist comes through in 1879, one of those class of doctors who name nervousness as illness and families as patients. He is not here to heal. He is here to study. He reads the parish books with a scientist's impatience and a historian's appetite. He copies phrases like a bee takes pollen, 2 made 1, exchange of burdens, for the tranquility of the parish. He notes that the priest wrote delicately about that summer, calling it yellow, without insisting on fevers. He remarks that in that year the house chapel hosted more christenings than funerals, which in such a parish is its own oddity. He writes in violet ink that is still faintly visible on the onion skin, where his pen pressed through. When he leaves, The papers go back to sleep. The reign of ribbons resumes. There is a trunk. There is always a trunk. In 1922, an archivist finds one bound with a ribbon labeled "Du nie pas ouvrir" and does as he is told. He records it into the parish storeroom with a number and a shelf, and then, in later years, the number does not appear where it should. The trunk's absence is not a conspiracy. It is a habit. Under the name of prudence, documents learn to move. The house that touches this file survived wars that broke other roofs and consolidated other debts. It declined to host posterity. By the 1890s, people spoke of it as a name that had grown thinner than the brass letters on its door. The line that had counted itself by daughters, who married well, and sons who counted barrels, ended on the far side of the century with a sale. The parish folded its books around it and marked the matter settled. What is known holds under a modest weight. 2 baptisms on a summer day in 1831. 1 godmother's name twice. A torn corner where a mother's name should be. A wet nurse receiving rations for 2 house infants. A physician noting, both infants thriving. A petition to manumit an infant, initialed, sealed, and then withdrawn, for the tranquility of the parish. A cash payment to the midwife. A confession letter that calls what happened the exchange of burdens, and insists upon mutual assent, unsigned and preserved only in a copy later made by the alienist, an 1867 succession sealed and misnumbered in the index. A trunk labeled, "Do not open." What is sealed or lost? Clerk's phrase includes any paper that spells an exchange plainly, any baptismal correction that would explain the godmother's duplication, and any conclusion of the 1867 court beyond its seal. What is disputed never reaches the dignity of oath. They counted 2 as 1, said in the kitchens. 2 candles kept in 1 window, said by a neighbor. The boy with the gentler hand learned to saw, said by a carpenter in the city whose grandson did not see the point of writing that down. These sentences carry tone instead of testimony. They refuse to cross into the ledger, because to cross that line would require names. We do not cross it here. We keep the initials, aligned with the era's habit, and with the mercy of distance. A file like this one teaches a reader to respect how the past made its own ethics. The countess who put a seal to a petition she then withdrew did not imagine us. The midwife who wrote and crossed names did not imagine anyone beyond the piece of paper in her hand. The priest who tore a corner did so with a motion so practiced it made no tremor in his ink. The notary who misnumbered a docket in 1867 knew exactly what he was doing. The alienist who copied their phrases knew exactly what he was preserving. 2 infants became one story that the parish told to itself in a circle, year after year, with a vocabulary that held equal parts law and conscience. It is a story visible in a handful of primary marks: double rations, double sponsorship, small cash, small tier, and in the large consequence that followed a family that called itself by a name the river would not say out loud. The deadly pact, as rumor named it long after, is less sinister in the archive than it is in a newspaper line. It is small and strategic and born of pressure, the sort of pressure that compels people to sign where they should speak and cross names where they should name. It is deadly only because the law made mercy a form of injury to someone else. We hold the file as it is. We refuse to fill in what the time kept quiet. We do not name the infants. We mark them with initials. We let the records sit side by side: baptism book, steward's ledger, physician's day book, notary's index, confessor's folded letter, alienist's copy, all of them part of a room that kept lives on the page and off of it with equal skill. The summer was yellow. The parish chose tranquility. The nurse received double. The line survived and did not. The chest was labeled "Do not open." The past obeyed and disobeyed in precisely the ways that human beings do. In this light, The torn corner that opens the page becomes more than a missing name. It is an aperture through which every following decision enters the room: a petition filed, a petition withdrawn, a cash sum paid to a midwife, a house that lights 2 candles in one window and pretends it is for show. It is the negative of a portrait that someone did not sit for. It is a way of saying that the record did not forget. It decided to remember differently. We begin here because this is all the archive will give us to begin with. The rest is a long reading, not a revelation. We will follow the dates the way a sailor follows a channel, by knowing where the deeper water is and where the sandbars wait. We will pass the years the parish passed, measuring the distance not in miles, but in seals, in redactions, in the courage some people had to attempt a petition, and in the discretion others had to bury it. We will do it with the restraints that the period honored, because accuracy is also a kind of compassion. We will not make a spectacle of infants who did not choose the names that were written for them. We will not show what the time refused to print. On a table in the parish office, the baptism book lies open to the summer of 1831. The godmother's name appears twice. The corner is missing. In a different drawer, a letter calls something: the exchange of burdens. In a ledger, the wet nurse receives double rations. In a doctor's notes, 2 infants thrive. In a petition, an infant is to be freed. The petition is withdrawn. In a chest, a ribbon warns not to open. We open only what we are allowed to hold, and we hold it gently, because that is how the story keeps itself intact long enough to be told. If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell. Tell us what city-state you're listening from. 9th of August 1831, House Chapel and Parish Desk. The page in the parish book wears the afternoon like a watermark. 2 christenings entered one beneath the other, in a priest's neat Latin, under the same roof and within the same hour. The sponsor, godmother, appears twice. That duplication is uncommon but not unheard of. Families of means sometimes pressed a single relative into symbolic service for more than one child. What is singular here is the economy of the inky, the names written with the same pressure. The crosses made with the same angle, the priests flourish identical on both lines, as though he prepared the entries together and ran no risk of forgetting them. Below his names, the space reserved for each mother is uneven. One line closes properly, the other ends at the torn corner that lets light edge the page. The tier takes the name with it, and nothing else. The house chapel ledger notes the fee for 2 candles, and in a separate hand, a purchase of 2 christening cloths, itemized and paid in cash, for the nursery, though in such houses godparents often brought 1 cloth as a gift. In the steward's book, that week's rations include milk, double, for nurse in the nursery, the plural suppressed, as if grammar could soften the arithmetic. On another line, a payment to be, midwife and nurse, matches 2 months of her usual ration, 1 sum, no purpose listed. The physician's daybook, precise as a metronome. Records, 2 infants thriving, no fever, nurse sufficient. He names mothers elsewhere in the book, when he records a difficult delivery, when he bills a poultice. But here he declines to attach any woman to either child. The midwife's tally, on the back of a laudanum wrapper, shows the 2 names again and again, crossed and rewritten as if a hand had changed its mind or obeyed a whispered instruction. In the hours after the baptisms, the sacristan who cleaned the chapel entered a small expense, linen washed twice, in the parish's household account. Sister C, who washed the cloths, wrote, stains of oil and tears, a nun's dryness that says as much as a paragraph. She did not sign the note, such women seldom did. The priest's page bears his signature and his title. He did not write the names of the mothers. He did not record witnesses beyond the sponsor, and a single godfather, whose name appears in other house christenings that summer. The priestary register felt complete to itself. The household papers argued otherwise. In kitchens and on porches, the phrase that would never be written learned to walk. They made two as one. The words have the cadence of a blessing or a curse, and in this parish they could be either, depending on the speaker. The day itself passed without report to any court or jury. The records absorbed it in their several ways: a tear, a double line in a ration book, a spare and repeated name in neat Latin, a discreet cash payment. The incident became a way of reading the page thereafter. Wherever duplicate phrasing or erasures appeared, people began to see intention, where a stranger might see only economy or error. 16th of September 1831, Notary's Office, Parish Square. 5 weeks later, the notary receives a petition to manumit, or an infant MH. Mixed. The Latin ex condition lies in the margin, an old habit marking the law that status follows the womb. The petitioner is named not as mother, but as Mistress A. Lodi de Villiers. Her seal, impressed on the wax, is a fragment of European gentility at work in an American parish. The silver it came from had already been sold and repurposed in other households, but the seal remained. In the notary's index, the line is entered with the date, the parties, and a note, rare in that book, written across the face. Withdrawn for the tranquility of the parish. The words arrive like a police minute. Tranquility is what parishes wished for when rumors sailed upriver. The kind of rumor that had turned Virginia into a night watch only weeks earlier. Whatever prompted the petition, it became too much for a room in which law and property converged. Within the week, the steward's ledger reflects a cash disbursement to be the midwife, the amount generous, the category customary. The wet nurse's ration returns to single measure. The physician writes evenly, both infants thriving, no agitation. There is a letter, never signed, tucked later into the back of a catechism. The exchange of burdens is completed. The letter claims mutual assent. It avoids names. Its French is the polished kind that writes shame and absolution in the same clause. It does not name God. It may be the confessor's hand. The confessor's hands wrote much and signed almost nothing in those days, and their papers were often preserved because they doubled as bookmarks in volumes too holy to be emptied for convenience. The sentence it contains, exchange of burdens, will reappear in 1867, copied into a clerk's notes, as a line that tried to hold mercy without turning into law. At the notary's office, the withdrawal is recorded with the same care as the petition. The journal does not state pressure brought by magistrates or by unsolicited visitors. It does not need to. The week's minutes of the police jury talk of patrols, and of formed talk of free papers arising. The atmosphere prints itself without writing directly onto the petition. The phrase, for the tranquility of the parish, becomes, in later years, both a pretext and an epigraph. Objects that ought to move, papers, petitions, learn to sit still. Autumn 1831, house, quarters, river. The steward's accounts for October show purchases, for the nursery, linen and a small table, and a repair to a window latch. The overseer, in his separate book, notes, hands restless, after news from the east, and insists on prayers in quarters, read by an older man. An entry made in French reads, the river runs high with talk. That autumn, steamboats hummed differently, and parishes measured enough quiet to make it through harvest. In houses like de Villiers, the difference between quiet and quietude was kept by women at night, wandering rooms where children slept. The parish vaccination register shows both infants receiving smallpox inoculations that winter, recorded under different initials on different days, and paid out of different pockets. One, paid by house, one, by parish. The medical ritual equalized disease in a way law did not equalize origin. The nurse's name appears in both entries. It appears there because payment required a witness, and the witness could sign with an XB, did. If the register had been conducted by a charity, rather than by a parish doctor, the infants' names might have been listed together, with a note about necessity. Here, they are separated by the rules of columns, and yet the same hand holds them both. The Board of Health met late that year to discuss cholera upriver. The minutes record no panic in St. Cyprian. Rumor would move faster the following summer. In 1831, the parish persuaded itself of its tranquility, and the phrase did the work it is built to do, to hush, to flatten, to delay. 1832. Parish House. Rivertown's cholera did come in 1832, as it did to most parishes along the Mississippi. The parish registers swelled with burials through the worst month. The priest began to write, mortus, with a heavier hand that summer, and then, when the wave passed, returned to the lightness he preferred. The infants from the house did not appear in that list. The physician's ledger noted a fever in one child, and the quick resolution of it. Thriving, he wrote again. The nurse's name recurs in the line for laudanum issued, to calm fretfulness. The notary's books for that summer show wills amended by men uneasy with the arithmetic of their holdings. Elodie's signature appears as a witness on a neighbor's codicil. She writes in a clean French that places her schooling beside the fortunes that paid for it. The house made purchases through the merchant on the square. Cloth and a pair of spoons, ordered for a christening gift not specified. The merchant's invoice contains an odd correction, initials reversed at the customer's insistence. The shop's explanation is penciled on the copy kept in the parish bundle. Madame desires alternate lines. No names, no scandal. Only an insistence upon a detail no clerk would argue with. The spoons did not appear again in any list until much later. They go here because their invoice belongs here. They turn up, for other readers, in a different room. 1834-1835, Parish School. Household bills in the parish school register. A new hand appears, P, listed for a few days one winter, withdrawn, by preference, and later supplied with copy books, charged to house. At the same time, the steward records a bill from a hired tutor, a man from the city, whose name surfaces in other houses when children required penmanship beyond the parish master's time. The tutor's receipt reads, 6 lessons. Good hand. The bill lands in the household accounts in a place reserved for miscellaneous, a drawer of a category where generosity and calculation mixed. The parish whispers adjusted to this new datum. The boy with a good hand learns in the big room. One woman said. The other boy sleeps with the rest and learns by the river. Another added. Both sentences tell less than they assume. The record shows penmanship paid for. It does not say who held the page. The baptisms still sit side by side. The torn corner is still a gap no ink has bridged. The midwife's double ration remains one of those entries that age refuses to rub out. 1837. Parish Courthouse. Merchant ledgers. The panic of 1837 scraped the parish, but not as hard as it might have, because sugar steadied what cotton did not. The de Villiers mortgages rolled forward. The notary, busier with men shaving terms and wives bringing jewelry, recorded more chattel instruments than in the years before. The house sold nothing declared. No change in effects. The inventory for an insurance rider declared. The merchant's ledger shows the purchase of a small suit for the houseboy, but the parish school still lists P as withdrawn by preference, language that keeps dignity in paperwork, whether or not it lived in rooms. A cooper's contract in a river town downstream, written 2 years later, includes a name that looks like M, the second initial condensed by the clerk's cramped hand, and describes the apprentice as Quick. The signature line bears an X witnessed by a preacher who specialized in printing contracts with a Bible on the table. The X is not proof of person, and the name is a guess. But the parish rumor, louder on wash days than on Sundays, said the arrangement was a kindness. Keep him near the barrels, the traders won't see him. People prefer their heroism local and their pity quiet. 1840–1842. Chapel lamps, quarter Sabbath, the house chapel account books, preserved through dull years by habit, list oil for lamps, for nursery prayers. A notation that appears 3 times in 1840 and then stops. The house observed a quarter Sabbath, an hour of peace in the labor, where a hymn could be heard from the river if the wind went wrong. In one season's list of camp songs, printed for use in the quarters, a line is underlined: "We have 2 names and 1 mercy," which may be a misprint or a private gospel set to a public tune. The priest's complaint about improvised songs made its way to the pastor's bundle and was answered with a letter that asked him to be patient. The priest's patience lasted as long as necessary. 1848. Inventory and departures. Prosper de Villiers died in a season when other men were dying of smaller fevers than the river's big ones. The 1848 inventory that followed is cleanly copied, as if the clerk took pride in legible debt. Somewhere between silver and seed cotton sits a line: token, gold locket with hair. Found among the hair's things. The hair, P, by initial, stood next to the notary while items were called off. He had a gentleman's hand, and he signed where the notary indicated. The locket was not itemized for sale. Its provenance was not discussed. The clerk added, "found," as an adjective that asked for no argument. Later, the locket disappears from lists the way a small kindness disappears from a ledger when larger numbers do their work. That year, a tutor's bill recurs, this time for figures, and a note from the sacristy requests a donation for the pew in the house chapel, paid by Elodie, not as widow but as lady of the house. The apprenticeship of a youth, P, of good hand, is drafted to a carpenter in the city. The form calls him obedient, a word that enters contracts without shame and should carry more than it does. The carpenter, a man used to being called master by people not of his household, wrote a letter of character for the boy after 3 months. Quick, steady, corrects himself. Language that begins to sound like the way men spoke of other men they could not own. A smaller contract, unsigned in the parish bundle, but mentioned in the merchant's ledger, places another youth into a cooper's yard, a river-side trade that kept a man near the water and far from horses. Practical details that read like guardianship when you already intend to read them so. The house did not move its godmother inscription, so to speak, into either of these forms. It did not need to. The parish already told the story it wanted to believe, that a pact had been made years earlier to distill harm into strategy, with women as its distillers and law as its vessel. 1853, yellow fever and candles. The summer of 1853 was called yellow with more justice than habit. The epidemic took households, boys and housemasters in the same week. The parish's mortuary book was a roll, rather than a column, for 3 months. The de Villiers list received fewer names than their neighbors. Luck by any measure. The chapel lamps burned longer. The sacristy bought extra oil, charged to Elodie, annotated as prayer light. The nurse who had been B's apprentice, D, by initial, signed a request for linens for the nursery. Though no christenings were noted, people said afterward that the lamps were doubled in the nursery window during the worst nights, enough to cast light onto the lawn. A notation in a gardener's book reads, 2 glass chimneys broken by wind, not by tremor. It is the sort of line that allows people to say what they wish, that the wind did not know what mercy intended. 1859–1861, wills and war. As the decade turned toward the war, wills multiplied in notarial offices as men rehearsed mortality on paper. Elodie appears in her neighbor's documents as a witness, carrying respectability into other rooms. The de Villiers papers add a supplement to the inventory, tidying a debt here, adjusting the valuation of a parcel of land there. No petition appears for names. No petition could. The town's grammar changed. The law it spoke did not. When the war came, the court moved slowly for what could be moved, and the house lowered its lamps to protect its glass. 1862 to 1865. Doors and drawers. The house did not escape requisition. A quartermaster napped in the front room in a year when other houses broke under soldiers' boots. The parish's papers, the thoughtful ones, were moved to clerks' homes. The baptism register for 1831 escaped not because as it was boring. The chest labeled "Do ne pas ouvrir" was recorded in 1864 as having been moved to the vestry and then returned to the storeroom in 1865. The vestry inventory lists it without comment. A mode stain on the ribbon differs between the entries for the 2 years. Proof taken later by a careful reader that the chest was opened and shut, though the note said not to. These are the small things one begins to look for in rooms where larger things decline to move. 1867. Reconstruction Court. When the petition came in 1867, it carried less the force of a new nation than the weight of older words. Heirship. Calls for paper. The depositions of that file, misnumbered in the index and then sealed, speak of the yellow summer, for 1831, as if dates had turned into weather. Witnesses name B. As present in the house and in the quarters, by necessity. The priest's language entered by way of a clerk, who copied his careful circumspection. It is known that complications were resolved in heaven. A sentence that suggests a conclusion without daring to say where it landed. A neighbor, testifying without ever using the names in question, said, "The lady kept her house, the nurse kept her word." His phrase means everything and nothing. The law that followed the womb was still the law in 1831. The law that freed those held by it had come and gone by 1867. The court faced a choice: to name an arrangement that had kept a household from scandal and a boy from sale, or to allow the parish to rest under its word. Tranquility. It sealed the file. It misnumbered the index. It committed the matter to the people who lived with it, which is to say, to rumor and to memory. What the depositions do show, in their thin light, are several consistent facts: 2 baptisms on 1 summer day, 1 godmother for both, the midwife's uncommon pay and rationing that month, a petition for manumission filed and withdrawn, a locket found among the hare's things, a record of education and craft that argued for 2 boys, differing but deliberate paths, the priest's careful phrases, the confessor's exchange of burdens. What the depositions avoid are the names that would seal one life to one line and another to another. Their silence is not cowardice. It is a kind of mercy enforced by the scarecrow of libel and the living tradition of not saying what a room will not bear. 1871 to 1875. Parish repairs, household dispersals after the war. The parish repaired roofs and reconciled ledgers. The house sold furniture piecemeal. An auction catalogue mentions nursery table, scratched, and pair of lamps, cracked chimneys, which any house might have listed, but which here sat for parish readers as a form of footnote to the years everyone discussed without notation. The sacristy replaced 2 pews, 1 paid by parish, 1 by anonymous. The shop on the square, now run by the merchant's son, sold 2 spoons engraved with initials that did not follow each other in the alphabet. He closed his account of the sale with a habitual flourish that older readers recognized as his father's. Spoon sales do not bear upon heirship. They sit in files because they satisfy a hunger for arrangement and a taste for proof by objects. 1879. The Alienist and His Notes. This is the part some readers would place with the investigation, but it belongs here as an incident because of how the man worked. In rooms, with papers, copying phrases as entries rather than arguments. He noted the baptisms, the torn corner, the godmother's repeated name. The manumission petition's withdrawal with its tranquility. Language. The steward's double ration for the nurse, the physician's thriving. The locket in the succession inventory, the apprenticeship papers, and the sealed 1867 file. He underlined, exchange of burdens, and wrote in the margin, the phrase is theological and economic, which is a doctored sentence and a historian's. He added the parish proverb in French and English, Dex pour un, two made one, and described it as, not quite folklore, more a household defense. He drew a line from the baptisms to the sealed file and wrote, pattern entries in pairs resolved by seals. He also recorded a small act of misfiling, a nurse's ledger from 1831-1832, placed beneath a land book from the 1840s, pages sticking. He separated them and wrote that the nurse's ledger showed one nurse, 2 infants. A ratio uncommon to houses with means. He wrote, unusual, and then copied the ration amounts. He did not find the chest mark do not open. It had slipped away by then into a private cupboard, or into memory. He left the parish with onionskin copies, and an affection for the phrases his pen had followed. The escalation across these years is not theatrical. It is clerical. Ink added and withdrawn, seals applied, pages torn and smoothed, copies made, misnumbers sustaining their important error. It is the kind of escalation that draws people toward a conclusion without allowing them to say the conclusion aloud. The parish did not need to say exchange. It signaled exchange with duplicate sponsorship, with family money spent at the notary, with tokens left among an hair's things, with craft set against labor in a deliberate distribution, with a petition filed for a child's freedom and then withdrawn because the parish valued its result more than its method. Witnesses emerge and vanish in the right places. Sister C washed cloths twice and wrote, oil and tears. The merchant corrected initials at a lady's insistence and wrote down his correction, a rare note in his ledger. The priest repeated one name and suppressed another and tore a corner after his ink had dried. The notary wrote and unwrote in the same week and retained his calm. The overseer wrote that the river was noisy with talk. The Board of Health wrote that it would not panic until necessary. The carpenter wrote that a boy's hand was good. The Cooper's preacher witnessed an X and called it sufficient. The alienist copied what others dared not arrange. The red flags that an outsider might call signs, the parish called habits, a line through a name and back again, a double ration, a candle burned twice as long, a pew, anonymous, a misnumbered docket, a chest nobody owned up to, labeled do not open, entered and then allowed to vanish from an index. These incidents build the shape of a method. That method had a human purpose, to protect a future with the instruments of the present. Baptism, notary, nurse, doctor, rumor. It had a cost. The exchange never entered an oath, and therefore never received absolution, legal or otherwise. It remained dynamic in memory but static in law, which is to say, it bequeathed discomfort to everyone it touched. The house carried that discomfort into every decision for decades: whom to educate, whom to place, when to light lamps, how to sit in pews, which trunks to label, how to answer when asked about baptisms. The parish preferred to think of as one. By the time you arrive at 1867, each earlier line becomes a witness. By the time the court misnumbers and seals, the file has been prepared not just by papers, but by practices. By those who understood how a parish stabilized itself in the aftermath of threat. The exchange, if exchange there was, never produces a confession. It produces a series of administrative acts that ultimately protect two people from outcomes the parish could not cleanly undo. It also makes descendants fight at kitchens over a story no one can finish and sets clerks to misnumbering. An art form of the quiet, no harm is displayed in these lines because the era performed it in slow motion with pens. The parish received 2 infants and needed them to become one heir, one boy at a cooper's yard. The women who made the arrangement, if arrangement they made, deployed the rituals the church and the courthouse placed within reach, and then sealed the door. The incidents that names their work are dull by design. A ration line, a torn corner, a reversed initial on an invoice, a misnumbered docket. In their patience lies the story's severity. In their precision lies its mercy. The investigation never assembled behind a single desk. It formed in margins and side rooms, each keeper of paper holding one piece and then setting it down. The parish notary recorded petitions and withdrew them when tranquility demanded it. The plantation physician tallied pulses and thriving infants, with a clinical steadiness that admitted nothing he could not charge. The confessor wrote a paragraph that both admitted and obscured, then declined to sign it. Decades later, an alienist copied phrases with the patience of a botanist pressing leaves. In 1922, an archivist logged a ribbon trunk labeled "Do Not Open" and, obedient to the label, consigned it to a shelf that later records forgot. No committee met to resolve the matter. The archive decided by what it kept and what it sealed. The notary's contribution is the most formal, a petition to manumit, an infant MH mixed, sealed by Elodie de Villiers, then struck through in his own hand for the tranquility of the parish. He added no sermon to his stroke. He did not need to. In parishes like St. Cyprian, silence arrived stamped, witnessed, and translated into both languages of the square. His registers demonstrate competence and something like mercy, the kind that protects paper first and people by consequence. The physician's daybook is exacting and unhelpful in the way professional documents often are. He wrote, both infants thriving, named no mothers, and itemized laudanum and cloth, as if arithmetic could close what law had opened. Elsewhere he wrote mothers' names, praised a midwife by omission, and dated fevers to reassure himself that events could be ordered. In 1831, on the days that mattered to us, he permitted no names to attach themselves to outcomes. A later reader might call this cowardice. It is more likely form. The daybook speaks in a dialect that holds only what can be invoiced. The confessor's letter, unsigned and copied later by the alienist, is the most human document and, because of that, the least admissible. It names nothing and no one. It refers to the exchange of burdens, rights, mutual assent, and finds its resolution in heaven rather than in any parish office. It lives in a catechism, not because the priest sought absolution from readers like us, but because holy books were safer places to hide a sentence presumed to be both necessary and unprintable. The alienist arrived in 1879 with a doctor's title and a historian's problem. He had come to collect instances of what his era called family disturbances, a term that allowed him to read baptismal leaves and inventory lists with a clinical eye. He copied everything that exhibited the cadence of repetition, the duplicate sponsorship, the torn corner, the double rations for a single nurse, the petition filed and withdrawn, the locket, found among the hare's things, the mismatched rotes by which 2 boys entered work, one to a tutor's desk, one to a cooper's yard. He underlined the confessor's phrase and wrote beside it, theological and economic cannot be separated. He noted the misnumbered 1867 succession with a scholar's relish for error that hides intention. He left with onion skin sheets where violet ink pressed through like a watermark of persistence. The 1922 archivist's part was smaller and, because of that, decisive. He logged a small trunk, ribboned and labeled "Ni pas ouvrir," onto a shelf with a number and a place. He took a photograph that shows the ribbon brittle and the seal intact. In the next inventory the number remains. In the one after, it does not map to any shelf. Between those entries lies the ordinary fate of troublesome papers, moved to a cupboard, absorbed into a private collection, or mislaid under the logic of, "not now." The archivist wrote no complaint. His role was to list, not to insist. Conflicts multiply whenever rumor and affidavit occupy the same parish. The rumor, two made one, is precise about intention and imprecise about mechanics. It claims a pact between a lady and a midwife, sealed by candles and a godmother's repeated name. The affidavits that survive, when they speak at all, speak in apparatus, rations, registers, receipts. No sworn witness ever wrote the exchange onto a page that could be read from the bench. The law, for its part, was simple and brutal. Status follows the mother. The conscience that pressed against it left other kinds of marks. A tutor's bill charged to a house, when the parish school listed a boy. Withdrawn by preference. A cooper's contract witnessed by a preacher's Bible. A locket found among the hare's effects, and then not found again. There is also a smaller but persistent conflict between legality and prudence. In 1831, a petition to manumit an infant was lawful, if rare. In that fevered month of rumors sailing upriver, it was unwise. The petition was withdrawn, the tranquility clause wrote itself. Later, in 1867, a suit that might have resolved identities would have unmade a parish's peace. The court sealed it. The index misnumbered it. The decision was not judicial so much as custodial, protect the town's bargain with itself. Chain of custody became a character. The nurse's ledger for 1831 to 1832, misfiled under a land book, revealed one nurse, 2 house infants. A laudanum wrapper carried the midwife's tally. Names written, crossed, and written again, because scraps travel where folios cannot. The baptism page, torn at precisely the place where a mother's line would have closed an entry, remained smooth elsewhere, which tells us more about the timing of the tear than about the knife that made it. The sealed succession bore a ribbon and a number 1 digit off. The ribbon stayed. The number deterred casual hands. The trunk in 1922 demonstrated how easily an object can be preserved and lost without ever leaving a room. To speak responsibly about this file requires the discipline of categories. The archive will allow for what can be called fact is signed, stamped, or entered by a keeper of office 2 baptisms on a summer afternoon in 1831, a godmother's name repeated, a torn corner where a mother's line ought to be, wet nurse rations doubled for 1 week, a cash payment to the midwife, the physician's notation, both infants thriving, a petition to manumit, infant MH, filed and then withdrawn, for the tranquility of the parish, inoculations recorded under different initials on different days, a tutor's bill paid by the house, a parish school withdrawal marked, by preference, an apprenticeship to a carpenter drafted for a youth. Of good hand, a cooper's contract witnessed downstream, an 1848 inventory listing, gold locket with hair, found among the hare's things, a misnumbered and sealed succession in 1867, the alienist's copies in 1879, the archivist's trunk in 1922. These are solid not because they are emotionally satisfying, but because the paper bears the weight of office. Plausible inference is the bridge careful readers walk when paper stops. A lady and a midwife, facing a law that made infants property by their mothers, agreed to exchange the names that attached the infants to their futures. One raised as heir to stabilize a house. The other kept close to kin in the quarters and guided, later, into a trade that sheltered him from sale. The attempted manumission in September 1831 signals an effort to correct the moral ledger.